Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again tonight with another episode of After the Buzzer, the show where I recap the NBA games from the night. It was a pretty packed 5-day slate of matchups. We saw the Golden State Warriors and Celtics face off in a finals rematch that went all the way to overtime, and we also saw a battle between two pretty underwhelming squads that also went all the way down to the wire, and one of these teams in particular I think has to think about maybe blowing things up at the trade deadline, and I'll explain why. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy, hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of these videos, and let's go ahead and get right into it. We're going to begin with Raptors versus Timberwolves, which, like I said, was a battle between two pretty underwhelming squads up to this point, but it ended up being a pretty fun matchup, more fun than I thought it was going to be, because it was really high-paced. Both of these teams near the 130 mark by the end of the matchup. They were basically just running up and down the court. It was like a track meet with a little bit of basketball involved. The Raptors went up by as much as 18 in the second quarter, and in the third and fourth quarter, they were up by double digits as well, and it kind of felt like Toronto was going to end up squeaking this one out, a pretty big win. However, Minnesota manages to come all the way back, mainly due to a 13-2 run late in the fourth, led by Anthony Edwards and D'Angelo Russell, with a little bit of Kyle Anderson sprinkled in there too. This gave them the lead, which they held on to, because the Raptors couldn't only not get stops, they couldn't score a bucket to save their lives at the end of this one, and so Minnesota walks out of here with a W. D'Lo and Ant combined for 48 points. Kyle Anderson had maybe his best game of the season, with 20 points, 10 rebounds, and 6 dimes. Jaden McDaniels, who's going to get an absolute bag on his next contract, had 18 points and 7 rebounds. And the Wolves, while like I said, they've been pretty disappointing so far, are now 7-3 in their last 10 games. They've shown some signs of improvement, and this is without Karl Anthony Towns still not being in the lineup, and as well as Gobert dealing with an injury of his own. So if they get fully healthy, maybe there's still a shot that they can salvage a bit of this season. Then we have the Toronto Raptors, who, while like the Timberwolves, they've been pretty underwhelming, the Wolves are trending up, and the Raptors, it feels like they continue to trend down. They're 7-14 in their last 21 games. They're still in contention for the play-in tournament. They're right there, and they're not that far behind of some of those squads at like the 7 and the 8 seed, but it just feels like they're not going to catch them. They don't have the upward momentum that some of those teams have. It feels like things are falling apart, and it's just shocking. After last season, they made the playoffs. They're one of the biggest surprises of the year. They were the 5 seed, and they gave the Sixers a lot of problems in that first round matchup, and many people even picked them to win that series because they had such an annoying combination of just physicality and length. Scottie Barnes won Rookie of the Year. OG Anunoby showed a lot of promise. Fred VanVleet made his first All-Star game. Pascal Siakam was an All-NBA player. Gary Trent Jr. was a solid shooter. Nick Nurse was considered one of the better coaches in the league heading into last season. And all around, it was just an amazing year, one that it felt like Toronto could really build off of coming into this season. Hasn't been the case. They've really fallen off a cliff in a big way, and this is despite Siakam playing out of his mind. Same with OG Anunoby. Fred VanVleet hasn't really performed up to expectations. Scottie Barnes hasn't taken that sophomore leap that many people thought he could. Gary Trent Jr. has gotten benched at times for some other guys. It's starting to feel like this core may have capped out with what they did last season. And sure, they could still end up making the playoffs through the play-in tournament, but even if they do, what are they going to do? Take like one game off of Boston if they can even manage that? They're not going to stand a chance against a Milwaukee or a Cleveland or a Philadelphia or a Brooklyn if any of those teams get a 2 seed. It's just not going to happen. They still aren't like terrible, but it's nowhere near what people were expecting from them. And at this point, I really believe it's time to break down this roster fully and trade all of Gary Trent Jr., Fred VanVleet, OG Anunoby, and Pascal Siakam. Now, I know a lot of Raptors fans aren't going to like that idea because they've probably grown attached to a lot of these players, which I would be as well. But I think it's what's best for the franchise long term because all these guys are close to expiring. You have to eventually move on from them. Fred VanVleet is in a contract year. He's going to be a free agent, assuming he declines his player option this upcoming offseason, which I would expect he would, to secure some longer term money. And right now he's playing really well. He's had 30 points in 2 of his last 3 games, and tonight he had a really solid performance. So Fred VanVleet, while like I said, he's been very disappointing, has shown a little bit of what he can still be. So maybe you can get a team to bite and give you like a pick or two and maybe a solid young player or at least some salary filler. This gives you some assets to use as you build towards your new future, while also you don't have to pay Freddie, who is still good sometimes, but it really seems like he's starting to decline. Then there's Gary Trent Jr., who also has a player option, and I think he will also decline that to go and try and get a longer-term contract and more financial security. As I said, he's been benched at times. There was one moment where Nick Nurse basically said like he's not really doing what we need from him, so he's going to get less minutes. It feels like a foregone conclusion that Gary Trent will probably get dealt. He's the most likely piece to get moved by the trade deadline, and I think he should be. When you go ahead and trade a guy like him, you could probably get like a pick and maybe a player in return that maybe you could flip in the offseason or by next year's trade deadline deadline as well. And then there's the bigger guys, Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby. Both, as I said, are having phenomenal seasons. Pascal is probably going to be an all-NBA player this year. He's 100% deserving of that and will absolutely be an all-star. So why would you trade him? Because, like I said, he's only got a couple years left on his contract. He's got this year and next season, and then he's going to be a free agent at the age of 30 years old. He's going to demand probably close to a supermax contract, like $40-50 million, depending on what the new CBA looks like. You can't pay him that if this team isn't going to be a championship contender long term. It's better to trade him now while he's having the best season of his career than potentially next year where he could be having a bit of a down year, and he also will be in a contract season, thus taking his trade value down a bit as well. Right now is the perfect moment to trade Siakam. His value is the highest it's ever going to be, and I'm sure there are many teams that are going to look to acquire him. I know there was rumors that like the Pelicans would be interested, and maybe you could get one or two of their young pieces, some draft picks, some salary filler, and you've got some guys to build around going forward. Same with OG Anunoby. He is having the best year of his career, but next year is the last year he's under contract. So a team is going to have to acquire him now and convince him to stay, rather than next season he could just potentially walk. So you go ahead, you deal OG Anunoby at the moment. You can probably get a pretty decent haul, maybe not as much as they're demanding, because I've seen rumors that they want like a Donovan Mitchell trade package for him. It's not going to happen. You're not going to get that for OG, but you could still probably get a few picks and like a decent young player or some salary filler. Once again, giving you picks, pieces that you can flip going forward, or if you get some young players, pieces to build around for this new future you have. And by doing all of this before the deadline rather than in the offseason, you not only allow yourself to trade Freddie and Gary Trent Jr., thus giving you a lot more assets, but you also allow yourself to really tank in the second half of the season pretty organically just by trading away all your stars. You're going to be bad, which is perfectly fine. It gives an opportunity for Scottie Barnes to just kind of run the show alongside the new pieces you acquired, and you could probably end up in those fifth best lottery odds for the number one overall pick in Victor Wembanyama. I don't think you'll be able to catch Charlotte, Detroit, San Antonio, or Houston. Those are probably going to be the bottom four teams basically locked, but I think you can get pretty close and end up with like the fifth or the sixth best odds. And that's not bad. If you end up in the top four, there are so many great prospects. Even if you stay at like a 6 or even somehow fall to a 7, the draft is really deep, plus all the assets you would likely get, some picks for this year's draft or at least in future drafts. This would allow you to trade back into the first round if you want to, or you can just hold on to these picks for future drafts if you need to trade up, or say one of these picks turns into something very valuable. So you've got a bunch of draft picks, you'll get some young players back for these pieces as well, and you've still got Scottie Barnes, who, like I said, isn't taking a massive sophomore leap like some people thought he might, but he's still having a pretty good season, and his last few games have been some of the best of his career, to be honest. Over the last 5 games, he's averaging over 20 points. Tonight, he had 29, 8, 5, and 2 on 11 of 15 shooting. He's shooting 62% true shooting percentage over his last 5 games. It seems like he's figuring a lot of things out. So in the second half of the season, you can just give Scottie Barnes the reins, say, hey, go out, just try things, see what you can do. Alongside these young players, let them build some chemistry. You get potentially a top 5, top 6 pick in what is a loaded draft class. You can maybe even trade up to like a 3 if you have to with some of the newly acquired assets. You let these players right now that have been good for you for so long go out and win in other places, and you will get a haul for each of them because they're all very talented. Overall, I just feel like this is easily the best solution for Toronto at this point. Sure, you could go into the offseason and say, hey, we'll bring everybody back and maybe OG and Scottie Barnes take some leaps, and all of a sudden, hey, we're really, really good. It's just not nearly as likely, and maybe Scottie Barnes becomes that number one franchise player championship option. In a few seasons, he becomes the guy that many people think he can become, but that's so far away. By that point, Siakam will be old, Fred VanVleet will have declined a lot, and you're going to have spent multiple years just kind of hanging around like the play-in tournament. Maybe you get a decent seed every now and again, and there's no guarantee. This is the best shot at the moment to really secure a ton of assets for the future, capitalize on the potential to get one of the best prospects in what is a loaded draft class, and just look forward to the new era rather than hanging on to this one. In some other league news, we saw a finals rematch between the Celtics and Warriors that went all the way down to the wire. Despite the massive record disparity between these two teams, it feels like every time they play, it's a really fun matchup. This one was absolutely no different. Golden State went up decently big in the third and fourth quarters, but Boston fought all the way back to send this one to overtime off a Jaylen Brown 3, his first of the game, which shout to him. He made his return from injury tonight, and he had a decent performance, although you could tell he definitely was a little bit rusty. Jason Tatum led the way scoring-wise with 34 points, 19 rebounds, and 6 dimes, albeit it was a really inefficient scoring night. The stat line is a bit misleading. Golden State just seems to know how to make Jason Tatum's scoring life really difficult, and he did still find ways to impact the game and put up some points like all great players do, but once again, Golden State just gives him some problems. Really, the huge keys to the game were Al Horford and Robert Williams, who dominated. combining for 34 points and 21 rebounds. They mainly dominated on the offensive glass, where Golden State really didn't stand a chance. They just don't have the bigs to keep up with Boston, although they did have somewhat success going small ball like they did for most of the game. Jordan Poole started this one as opposed to Kevon Looney, and he played a majority of the minutes. This is also something that Steve Kerr said will probably be the case going forward, so maybe this is his idea to kind of fix the underwhelming season they've been having. We'll see how that goes. Draymond had a really good game in this one with 11 points, 13 rebounds, and 9 dimes. He also got 20 pieces from the other 4 starters, but it just wasn't enough. I also want to give a shout out to Malcolm Brogdon, who had 14 points, 7 rebounds, and 2 assists, and his stat line continuously does not show how impactful he is, because he was super critical to the Celtics winning this game. Final game I want to go in depth into is Suns versus Nets, one that also went down to the wire after Phoenix was up by I believe as much as 24 points. Kyrie Irving had a massive fourth quarter and finished with 30 points, 7 rebounds, and 7 dimes. He really took over. Claxton had 20 points and 11 boards, but it wasn't enough. They were mainly dominated by DeAndre Ayton, who had 24, 14, and 4. Bridges had 28 points, and Cam Johnson, who made his return and looked really good, had 19 points for the squad, and it ended up being enough to get them a very close win. I do want to quickly talk a little bit about a rule change I think the NBA needs to make. The Nets were down 3 at the end of this one with a few seconds to go, and the Suns intentionally fouled to give them free throws and therefore making it impossible that they could hit a 3 and send the game to overtime, which is a strategy that a lot of teams use, and I'm not a big fan of it. I think it's pretty similar to the take foul, where it ruins a lot of the entertainment value of the game, and I also think it's kind of lame when both teams have incentives to foul at the end of things, because that just turns into a free throw competition on both sides. It's just kind of lame in my opinion, and I think it's a real change they should make. Let me know your opinions in the comment section below. To wrap up the final 2 games, we saw Joel Embiid and the 76ers take down the Blazers by double digits. Embiid had 32 points while James Harden had a triple-double, and Tyrese Maxey continues to thrive in a bench role. You also had the Pistons face off against the Bulls in France, with Chicago getting the best of them. They're led by Levine, who had 30, 26 points from DeMar DeRozan, while Bojan Bogdanovic had a 25-point, 5-rebound, 3-assist performance. He's going to be one of the hottest commodities on the trade market when the deadline rolls around. With all that being said, I appreciate y'all watching. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of these videos, and comment down below letting me know, do you agree that the Raptors should go ahead and blow things up right now? Do you think I'm overreacting, or do you think at this point they could go either way? It's really not going to matter. Appreciate y'all watching. I'll see y'all later. Real one, say it back.